Sega's final console was never in direct competition with the GameCube, so what was it competing with? I am the Game Collector, and this is Second Opinion Games, and today we're doing the Nintendo 64 versus the Dreamcast.
Second Opinion Games.
We're going to start things off old school with Midway's Greatest Arcade Hits Volume 1 for the Nintendo 64. Starting things off with a little game of Joust, where you're a bird trying to knock other people off their birds. This is a very faithful recreation of Joust and done quite well using the D-pad on the Nintendo 64 controller. However, pressing the flap your wing button actually seems to be better. I remember having to hit it at least twice as much to get any type of lift off the ground. So this is a very much needed change. Also, there's Robotron here, which plays great. It's super fast, just like in the arcade, and is pretty much spot on. Again, using the D-pad and not using both the D-pad and the analog stick at once. You have to use the C buttons to kind of shoot around in a circle. We have the classic Defender here too. It's very faithful to the arcade, and it just plays really well. We also have Sinistar. Now here you could actually use the analog stick to move your ship around, but when the Sinistar appears, first of all, it makes me nearly crap my pants because this thing is a beast, but also the controls go wonky and sometimes they freak out. I think I may have dropped my card a few times too many. Either that or it's a glitch in the system. We also have Spy Hunter, and it also controls with the analog stick and works pretty darn well. Even if I happen to be pretty bad at this game, I think I just need a little bit more practice. And Root Beer Tapper! This is a lot of fun. I'm used to playing on the ColecoVision, so I need to kind of relearn how to play it here, but it's just like the arcade version, and it's definitely worth playing. And finally, we have a game of trivia, and I love me some trivia, and some of these questions are legit hard, and some of them I just breeze through. If you get one wrong, it has a really annoying sound that I just can't stand, so I try to get as few wrong as possible. Overall, this is a great package, but over on the Dreamcast, well, we have Defender, and it's just like the Nintendo 64 version, so that's a bit of a wash. We also have Joust, only this time they kept it completely intact, making it super annoying to tap the button as fast as freaking possible to get any lift off the ground, so I'd rather be playing it on Nintendo 64. Robotron is also about the same, but instead of using those nasty little tiny C buttons, we actually have the face buttons on the Dreamcast controller itself, making it a bit easier to play. Sinistar, my controls don't freak the heck out when I'm playing this game, and it's also the only game in this package for the Dreamcast to actually use that analog stick. This is definitely the reason to have the Dreamcast version over the Nintendo 64 if you're really into Sinistar. But moving on to our next game, it's not Spy Hunter, it's Bubbles. So are they trying to say Spy Hunter isn't a superior game than this, just moving bubbles around? This is kind of awful. It feels like I'm cleaning. We also have Defender 2, which is much like Defender 1, so they got rid of Root Beer Tapper and they gave us this, another game that's almost the same as a previous game. That just freaks me out. And also, they got rid of the trivia altogether. So, seeing that they cut back on a lot of corners, including the big one, on the Nintendo 64, you can look at the arcade cabinets in all of their glory before you even start playing. And on the Dreamcast, it just has this bland setup of arcade cabinets. Also, the background noises seem to be far worse when you're in the arcade on the Dreamcast version, and there's a couple of other minor little things with the overall presentation that are far better on the Nintendo 64. So, Nintendo 64 gets the win. In the puzzle game category, we have Wet Tracks. It's a game all about creating hills and valleys to hold water. Yes, precious water. Sometimes a meteorite will come down and you have to blast it into the water to dry some up, and then create more hills and valleys and try and keep as much water on the stage as possible. The gameplay here does get really addictive, but the controls just feel off. Also, the colors are kind of dark. Even though the graphics here were really impressive for the time, I don't think that they hold up very well. But on the Dreamcast, we have Wetrex Plus. I know this is supposed to be an upgrade, but let's just face it, it's pretty much the exact same game, but the graphics are a bit better. Also, the sound effects are better, but most importantly, the controls are fixed, so it actually feels like you're in control of your puzzle pieces this time around. On the Nintendo 64, I barely felt like I was in control at all, making it not a very fun puzzle game. Over here, it's far more addictive, which just made me want to keep on playing, even though I am really bad at this game. The Dreamcast definitely takes the win for its brighter graphics and being able to play the game the way you want to. In the party game department, there's South Park Chef's Love Shack. For a Nintendo 64 game, there is quite a bit of spoken audio going on, and it's quite impressive. Now, the trivia questions here were dated even for their time, so if you grew up watching old 80s game shows and just laughed at the awful trivia, well then you'll love this entirely. Also, the mini games are kind of fun the first time you play them. After that, they really start to lose their luster. And when you play it, it's kind of a good time, a good rental, or just pick it up for $5 and play it every once in a while with a group of friends. After a while, the trivia questions do repeat themselves, and the presentation here isn't that bad. And also, if you happen to ring in early, you'll have no idea what the question is. So there's really a trade-off of how fast you can read in this game. Over on the Dreamcast, it is the exact same game. The one big difference is Chef actually reads all of the questions out loud, so you don't have to be a reader to play this game. However, if one person in the group reads really fast, well, they're probably going to be able to answer every question before Chef even gets done saying it, making the whole game feel really unfair. And that's where you have to get good at those really funny mini-games like spanking the monkey. Yeah, this is great to play the first time around, but after that, it's just awful. Overall, Chef's Love Shack is a game you should probably pick up for $5, and you should get it for the Dreamcast over the Nintendo 64 because of its brighter graphics and all of the extra voice sampling. In the sports game category, we have NFL Blitz 2001. It's a fast and frantic arcade-style football game with a lot of cheese in there. The emphasis on passing is truly here because you need 30 yards to create a first down. The Nintendo 64 controller does a great job playing this game, and over on the Dreamcast, we just get more of the same. The blocky graphics have been cleaned up quite a bit, even though I almost prefer the old blocky graphics from the Nintendo 64 over these much better graphics on the Dreamcast. Just something about added blocks I just kind of love. Also, the action is far more frantic, and the announcers are even more over the top. Both these games are great, so honestly, it's a draw here. In the alternative sports, we have Tony Hawk Pro Skater. Now, this game was probably best played on the original PlayStation, and on the Nintendo 64 version, they really didn't do a good job converting it at all. The controls just feel wrong. No matter how you decide to play this game, you never feel like you're in full control of it. Also, the music tracks really aren't there because the game cartridge really didn't have the room to do it justice. Over on the Dreamcast, well, the controls are quite a bit better, probably still not as tight as the old PlayStation 1 version, but we still have all the great music tracks that are guaranteed to get this video banned off the internet. And also, it's just a little bit better looking. And I mean a little bit. It's still kind of dark at spots, but overall, definitely go with the PlayStation 1 version over any of these. Or maybe play Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. I guess if you have to, pick the Dreamcast. In the racing game category, we have Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. Now, for a Nintendo 64 game, the draw distance is quite good. Also, the sense of speed that it gives you is insane. The sound effects and the music going on in the background really gets your heart pumping, and this feels like an excellent game. And if you add in this super awesome gimmick of using two controllers with two analog sticks at the same time to control your pod, you'll find that this is a fun arcade experience experience for your Nintendo 64. On the Dreamcast, the graphics just blow the Nintendo 64 out of the water, but that's a little expected, just same as the sound effects being far cleaner with less distortion. The controls are also really good and tight. They actually feel quite a bit better than Nintendo 64. So here the only big difference is not using two controllers to play the game, but let's face it, most people don't do that on Nintendo 64 version of the game, so the win definitely has to go to the Dreamcast again. In the fighting game department, we have Mortal Kombat 4. Now, Nintendo 64 controller isn't really well suited for this style fighting game. Either that or the programmers really didn't know what the heck they were doing, because being able to reliably pull off your moves is somewhat difficult, so trying to get a fatality going on is even harder. Now, it's also a little bit difficult because when you can't pull off the moves you want when you want to do them, you're probably gonna die. Over on the Dreamcast, it's called Mortal Kombat Gold. It is far more reliable to do your moves consistently this time around, so sometimes I could beat people without even looking at the screen because Quan Chi is one of the cheapest characters to ever be in a Mortal Kombat game. And also, when you do beat the game, then you get a full-fledged cutscene instead of just a couple of little stills. With the added characters and the better controls, the win definitely goes to Mortal Kombat Gold. But it's really still a bad game, so kind of stay away from this one in general. In the action platformer department, we have Rayman 2, The Great Escape. This is definitely one of the best action platformer games for the Nintendo 64, even if no one talks about it. And it's kind of weird because I do believe it's better than Donkey Kong 64, and that gets quite a bit of hype. Controlling Rayman is really easy to do. Picking up all the little sprites on the screen is a lot of fun for the collectathon aspect, and the levels themselves are big and varied. Over on the Dreamcast, it's the exact same game, only cleaned up tremendously. The sound effects have been improved, everything's a bit brighter, and this is the reason why no one talks about it on Nintendo 64, because the Dreamcast version was so good, all of the GameCube and Xbox and PlayStation 2 versions were just ports of the Dreamcast version. They really knew they had something special going on with the Dreamcast, and that's why you have to get it for that system. Okay, let's wrap this up with a little bit of Hydro Thunder. I know I already did the racing game category, but this is one of my favorite games, and I think it sums up the two consoles perfectly. On the Nintendo 64, it looks and plays alright, and it does seem a little bit dark, and yes, there is some Nintendo 64 fog. Over on the Dreamcast, it's nearly arcade perfect. The controls are spot on, and it is definitely the superior title in sound and graphics. And I know the Dreamcast itself is definitely superior in sound and graphic capabilities to the Nintendo 64, so why bother even doing this versus comparison? Well, because of the sad short life of the Dreamcast, it really didn't compete with the Xbox, GameCube, and even the PlayStation 2 as much as it did compete for the Nintendo 64 itself, so I think the comparison is pretty darn fair. And also, I remember at the time going over to a friend's house when they wanted to play Nintendo 64, I would continuously say, hey, why don't we play the better versions at my house on the good old Dreamcast? And that's why it clearly gets the win. But of course, that's just my opinion. Thanks for watching.
Lesbian role models hate this company, the world leader in ladies' razors.
Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I had a great time making it, seeing through the fog of Nintendo 64 and all of the polygonal goodness. I gotta say, it's a very fun system to go back to. However, my Dreamcast never leaves my shelf because it is one of the best game systems to ever be made, and it's the first time that I really felt like I was playing arcade games at home, and it sadly never stood a chance. And that's why I want to know what other game systems never really got a fair shake in the marketplace. I know the Dreamcast was far from the only one here, and I just want to read your comments just telling me about the other systems that people might have missed out on. I know I didn't because I have like everything, but the Dreamcast definitely has a special place in my heart. So until later, I will see you again, guys.
You're the one for me. You and me and her. Simultaneous you and me and Winona Ryder. Simultaneous loving, baby. 2 or 3. Simultaneous